Hey guys, welcome back to Season 1 of the Stand-Up Review podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're reviewing Urzila Carlson's 2020 special, Overqualified Loser. Let's get into it. So we'll start off as usual with some background, but first a little bit of housekeeping. This special came out last week during the mid-season break, so it's a little bit late, but I'm throwing it as the first episode as the second part of Season 1. Urzila Carlson is known for her regular appearances on 7 Days and Have You Been Paying Attention? She has done some shorter shows including Comedians of the World, but this is her first full special. I had never heard of her before and this is the first time seeing of her. In terms of her comedic style, it's storytelling and observational comedy. But with all of that out of the way, let's get into the show itself. At the opening of the show, Urzila jumps straight into it. She doesn't have any kind of introductions or anything like that. The first bit she talks about getting gifts from audience members. She tells a story and it's not the funniest bit, parts of it are good, and she does end the bit really well. There's an amazing joke to finish off with, so it kind of makes the bit round off nicely, but generally it's just not that funny. After that she talks about getting a check over, and again the first half of this bit isn't that great. There's a lot of unnecessary build-up and a lot of the jokes themselves just aren't really that funny. I would describe them as more internet style jokes, but again, like in the first bit, the story for the second half of this bit is really good. She then goes on to talk about making a sex tape, and this is a really great bit. She probably should have opened the show with this. She creates a scenario using members of the audience, and even though it goes on for a long time, she keeps your attention really well, and it is funny throughout. She goes on to talk about fat people, and this bit is quite good. It's just, well, it's kind of average, but it's not boring. It does go on for too long, and certain parts she probably just needed to skip past. It's also, like I said, this is fairly average in terms of how funny it is, so if it was funnier, she might have gotten away with it being that long, as she did in the previous bit, but a majority of it just isn't funny enough to really keep your attention. In the next bit, she talks about parties, and this bit, again, it's not that funny. They're the type of jokes you'd get on social media. There is an amazing joke in the middle of this bit, which shows that she's capable of writing better stuff, but other than that, I just didn't find this funny at all. She then jumped around a few different topics, and I'll take this moment to say that her style of comedy really isn't for me. She is funny in places, and her storytelling is brilliant, but it's difficult when you don't find the story or the jokes particularly funny. And it's fine to not enjoy a show or to have a different audience than other comedians. It's good to have that variety within comedy, and I'll talk a little bit later on about that difference. But I'm not going to lie to you guys, and if I don't enjoy it, I will tell you. After that, she talks about flip-flops, and there's some good observation here, but she was pretty much just saying quite obvious things that was somewhat formatted as a joke, and I just don't find this style very funny. I think it's all just saying fairly obvious things that almost anyone could point out, and there's not really a joke there in my opinion. And this brings us to the end of the show where she talks about balls, and this is a pretty good bit. It's actually a really good way to end the show. The only problem with the ending is that it just ends very suddenly, like she's literally in the middle of a sentence when she says, "You guys have been amazing," and finishes. It's really bizarre, but as I said, the actual closing bit works really well, and it does sort of leave you with a much better view of the show than you would perhaps have had otherwise. It is just that last sort of sentence that she cuts off and leaves the show quite awkwardly. Now, a few extra things to mention. There is one callback, but it is brilliantly done, and it forms the punchline of one of the best jokes throughout the whole show. And that's how I like callbacks to be used, every now and then as a punchline or a brilliant setup to a joke, and just hit the audience out of nowhere. In terms of transitions, certain bits blend together in a way where I'm not really sure if they are the same bit or not, which is the perfect way to do it really. But then sometimes she'll move on in a way that feels extremely awkward. It won't necessarily be forced, but she'll just kind of be in the middle of talking about something or won't really round off a bit properly. And it kind of feels like she's trying to blend them together in the way that I spoke about before, where it's seamless and you're not really sure if she is moving on or not. But it's her first full special, so I'll cut her a bit of slack and say that generally speaking, she does transition really well. In terms of her stage persona, she's very confident and self-assured on stage, and Urzila is clearly comfortable performing. But I don't know if either I just don't know enough about her or she just doesn't have a stage persona, but I don't think there's an obvious one to spot there. As for the audience, they laugh mostly where she wants them to, and they do help the show along really nicely. Urzila is quite big in New Zealand, so she's probably built up an audience of her own who know what to expect from her. And that really shows throughout the special, and the audience really do help form the special and kind of break up the jokes nicely. Now finally, some overall thoughts. This is a bit of a weird one because I completely see how you could love the show, and maybe I'm just not the target demographic, but I really didn't enjoy it at all. I'm not really sure who I would recommend this show to. I guess if you're a fan of Michael McIntyre, you'll probably enjoy this. And this comes back to there being so much variety within comedy, and that's a good thing because A, everyone likes to relax and have a laugh, but also not everyone should be expected to enjoy the same style of comedy. And it just comes down to me preferring darker or even just less obvious comedy, and it feels wrong to mark Urzila down for that. But ultimately, this is just my opinion, and I still try to be fair and point out that that's the reason I'm being critical. And to be honest, as far as that style of comedian goes, Urzila is really good, but because I didn't enjoy it and I won't watch her outside of this podcast, it's going to be a 3 out of 10. This podcast is brought to you by our patrons. If you want to help support the podcast, then head on over to patreon.com/standupreview. With tiers starting at as little as £1, there are some great benefits, such as voting for which specials you want reviewed, Q&As, bloopers, early access to podcasts, exclusive podcasts, and many more. Sign up at patreon.com/standupreview, and thank you for your support. As a special limited time offer, anyone who becomes a patron during the month of July, regardless of which tier, can choose one stand-up special that will be reviewed on the podcast, as well as receiving the standard benefits for the tier you choose. This offer runs out on the 31st of July, so head on over to patreon.com/standupreview for this one-time deal. Thanks for listening to the Stand-Up Review podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to subscribe to get new episodes as soon as they come out every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Check out our Patreon for some awesome benefits at patreon.com/standupreview. If you have any thoughts or suggestions for the show, whether it be a new segment or a show you'd like us to review, let us know on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at Stand Up Review, and give us a follow while you're over there. Feel free to share this or any of our other podcasts on any social media platform. Have a great day, and we'll see you for the next episode. This podcast is made possible by our patron, Brad Oldfield. If you would also like to support the podcast, head on over to patreon.com/standupreview, and thank you for your support.